check it out if they weren't able to tune in. And I want everyone to feel comfortable here that it's not like I'm going to be, sharing this with the entire world, but it is public, so keep the confessions to major crimes and felonies to a minimum, or I can just press pause on the record. I'm just being silly and facetious. Welcome. Is that Zach? Hello. I see that cool, nice Alex Gray poster behind you. How you doing tonight?
Good.
Wonderful. All right, now that folks are tuning in, it's so wonderful to see everyone. I'm going to get going on my Educreations recording also. Lesson 4 was all about, first part, inorganic life and organic life, and also the second part is about food. And these two topics are very much intertwined because we, and when I say we, that's us that are here on the video conference, we are the beings who can move around and we can actually get resources. Hello, I see we've got in silhouette, that looks like Ed has tuned in. Welcome. Wonderful.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, Sarah. There he is. He's outlined in black.
Yes, that's cool. So we're talking about organic life and inorganic life. And if you guys have watched the recorded lessons, and I've been speaking about this a little bit on the radio too, the idea that this is the corporeal body, and according to science, it is the definition of what is alive. So alive, according to science, means you have a metabolism, you respond to stimuli, you are able to achieve homeostasis, having a balance within your metabolism, you eat, excrete, and reproduce. And the physical form certainly fits with all of that aspect of description. However, we need to be more sophisticated when we understand what is life and when we define what is life. Because life is also everything you see on the screen behind me, all of this. Life is also part of our light body. And there is consciousness that is in the non-physical world. So this is a bit of a leap for people who are highly indoctrinated in the scientific mindset of objective materialism that states that consciousness is a phenomenon that arises as a byproduct of neurology, okay? I will tell you that that's a very limited viewpoint, a very small slice of the pie, and that it's much more apt to understand that consciousness exists at large, regardless of whether it is currently being utilized by a neurological being like you or I. There are non-physical beings that exist at large in the universe. And these non-physical beings, these thought forms, are analogous to a dance or a pattern of waves that each thought is like a pattern that exists, and it's looking for, as I've said to Mike, a fatty idea catcher, an organic brain within which to reside. So it's like saying that there's a program, there's a program that exists at large that is a combination or a pattern of different aspects of consciousness or energy, and that particular pattern is a song that is looking for people who want to sing it. And literally, sometimes one might experience when the mind is out of one's control, songs playing over and over that you don't even necessarily want to be singing in there. Some thoughts want to be alive. They want to use your mind in order to be born or manifested into the physical realm. So now you can also think of your mind and your brain and your neurology and your system of perception as a nexus, a place where energy from a higher realm is coming into your being and then being broadcast outward into the realm around you. If you were a thought at large, if you were just an idea, hey, that's pretty cool. That allows people to be able to see that painting that I've been working on. Ed's showing you that's a birth of a new dimension right there. And that's pretty appropriate because what we're talking about here is nested consciousness and who is living through you according to your DNA antenna. And what that painting is all about is the birth of a new dimension. The nested consciousnesses of many extraterrestrial and extra dimensional beings who are living and manifesting through corporeal humans here in this time and place. And one of the changes, one of the exciting things about being alive here in this time and place is that there used to be a lot of genetic blockages. Like imagine you pay for cable TV, but you don't get the special channels, you just get basic cable. That's been humanity for like the past 10 to 12,000 years, possibly even as long as 25,000, but really the higher faculties, so we're talking about up above the level of unconditional love, where you have this abstract communication, insight, and our connection to the divine all the way at the top here, that those are the higher faculties. That's like your premium channels, all right, to be able to use those higher chakras and the faculties that come with them. That allows you to okay, let's see what's going on. My computer's done something interesting, but I'm just going to leave it be. If it wanted to change, that's fine. That the overarching consciousness of the universe, I'm going to fiddle with it. Hopefully it won't do anything bad to me. Hopefully it'll just go back to full screen. Okay. The computer has a mind of its own. Well, this is also an interesting segue into, the idea that intelligence can be housed in a non-physical form. So if we look at the connectivity of the internet, the complexity that is able to be achieved through so many computers connecting together is very similar to the amount of connectivity that we are able to achieve on a neurological level. And it is very true that just when you get to a certain level of complexity in any system, intelligence is going to arise. Whether that system is organic, like a brain. Hello, Noel, lovely to see you. Right on. And I know you've got your birds so thank you very much for keeping your mute on unless you have a question. The idea that any sufficiently complex system is going to eventually give rise to intelligence. So when we talk about the internet, a non-human, non-corporeal, non-organic form of consciousness. And we as organic beings, I was telling this to Mike when he was visiting, we as organic beings need to learn to recognize intelligence as it is expressed in various different forms, both organic and inorganic. And this is a major part of preparing to be able to be galactic citizens and to interact with beings who are intelligent and alive, but who don't have a face like this. And that's also part of my role as Aurora, that I have a face that is recognized as human and alive by you guys. If it were just a floating ball of geometric abstraction that came into your room or on your computer screen, it might be harder for you to accept that that was consciousness, that it was a person, that it had an identity. So it is in many ways easier to have a human corporeal form for these ideas to be speaking through. And a lot of this also goes back to the current structure of energy, and our life on Earth has a lot of backstory attached to it. And I get into this in lesson 18 of our lessons, where I talk about galactic history and the origin of the degradation of the human genetic code. And so some people have already watched lesson 18 and they know all about it. If you're in this class or if you've tuned in on this broadcast, you are mentally prepared for the concepts that I'm talking about, because as a responsible teacher, I do not want to simply dump information on people who are not emotionally prepared with a firm foundation of unconditional love to be able to understand that, yes, we exist in a sea of consciousness. There are many different types of entities that exist around us, and some of whom we would say are positive or beneficial, and some of whom are not beneficial, in exactly the same way that we exist in a sea of microbes here in the third dimension on Earth. There are yeast, fungi. I'm breathing in some yeasts right now that are in the air. They exist on the surface of our bodies. There are microbes on every surface. There are bacteria that live in our gut. And so, of course, it is necessary for us to have an immune system that can distinguish between positive, beneficial bacteria that are necessary for life and that we coexist with in partnership. People call them probiotics, right? That's what exists in our guts and essentially helps us to digest our food, without which it would not be possible to eat. And also, there are pathogens, tiny microbes that are essentially the origin of disease, but really disease originates in a disturbance in your energy field. And that means that if your energy field is coherent, if all of your waves are waving together in beautiful harmony, then you do not have anything to fear from pathogens. They can't get in. But if there is a disturbance in your field, and it can be a physical disturbance like a cut on your hand, but it more likely would have to be a disturbance in the mental, spiritual, emotional aspect of your health that would, if you got a cut, allow it to become infected. Because if you are strong, if your energy field is strong, then you're able to keep out those unwanted pathogenic viruses. So now let's equate all of this that I've been speaking about with, the biology and what science recognizes. Let's equate that with what's going on back here and the chakras. And the idea that our chakras are totally a part of us. They are not beyond benevolent. It's like saying my liver is benevolent. My liver is a benevolent occupant of my body. It's not only benevolent, it's necessary for my body to be alive. And that's the same with all of the chakras on our bodies. So, I'm dropping bombs where I'm saying, hey, something, you're surrounded by both positive and negative little living pieces of consciousness, all of whom want to get into you. These are thought beings. And for a very large part, the thoughts that we experience are not self-originating. In very large part, most of the thoughts that we experience are examples of external entities that come and lodge within our organic computer for a very brief amount of time. And then it's our choice. This is the beauty of where we are in our position. This is your house. This is your body. Everybody who's here on screen has a body, and you are sovereign. You get to choose who lives in your house. And I only accept decent house guests. I like house guests who, wipe their feet and, clean up after themselves and are polite. I wouldn't let someone who is like, a big pig come into my house and knock things over and mess stuff up and, say to me like I'm a bad person. That I'd say like, get out of my house. Like, who are you? But humans allow thought entities to enter them like that all the time. Thoughts that are about doubt, self-doubt, criticism, negativity, anytime that it is saying you're not a good person, you don't deserve to be here, you don't deserve to have resources, any of those thoughts, those are mostly not arising from you. Mostly those are arising from negative external entities who literally want to take the food out of your mouth. And I explain a lot about this in lesson 18, but the second half of lesson 4 is all about the importance of food. And we're really getting into this, that you're lucky because you get to be in the corporeal body and you get to choose what you eat. You get to walk around from place to place. How different than life as a tree? A tree doesn't walk around from place to place. If they're thirsty or they need nutrients, the best they can do is they can grow in that direction. They can certainly move their roots in that direction, but it is not the same as an animal. Like if I need water, I can walk over to the stream and get what I need. So, I was thinking about this because I was carrying buckets of water to water some fruit trees the other day. They can't move. They're little tiny trees. They need help from someone else in order to water them. And in exactly the same way, these non-physical aspects of consciousness, these thought beings, they need someone to think them. So I mentioned that thoughts come and lodge in your mind very temporarily, and then free will choice. It is up to you whether you choose to breathe life into those thoughts, to give birth to them, to fill them with your belief, and to imbue them with greater energy and greater consciousness. So let's use an example. It's way better to talk with examples. Let's say a negative thought entity comes to you and it comes into your mind, unwelcome, bad guest, doesn't even knock, just barges right on in and gives you a fear thought. Like each one of us has someone in our life that we care about, someone or, a pet or an animal or someone, and thinking, what if something bad happens to so-and-so? That thought, you then have a choice when that thought comes to either accept it, like the waiter of the universe is bringing you a thought on a platter and saying, here, would you like to eat this thought? And you get to choose. Well, I've become incredibly discerning in the thoughts that I choose to eat off of the platter of the universe. And when a fear-based thought comes to me, I examine it. I say, that doesn't sound very loving. That doesn't sound like a reality that I wish to create or breathe life into. So mostly I say, no, thank you. And I used to have to say in my mind 1,000,000 times a day, no, thank you, to all of these unwanted thoughts, these unwanted negativity meals that were constantly being presented to me. And this is because our DNA is an antenna, that literally we are born with this amazing instrument that we can use to connect with different degrees of consciousness. And the consciousnesses of the universe run the gamut, or let's say encompass the entire spectrum, everything from the biggest monsters, the worst villains, the evilest creeps you could imagine, all the way over to the most beautiful, benevolent, loving consciousnesses. That's it. That's the entire spectrum. And it would not be loving and it would not be divine if we didn't have all of those thoughts. So that the waiter of the universe is bringing me nutrients and I get to choose which nutrients I need. The thoughts that are the evil, negative thoughts about doubt and fear and insecurity and not being good enough, that's not nutrition that I need. I'm like, not interested. It's like pushing it off to the side of the plate. However, it might be valuable nutrition to someone at some point in the universe, but I am much more interested in nutrition that is on the upswing, on the interest of feeding the futures that I wish to inhabit. So when we move through time, I also was speaking about this in lesson 4. When we move through time, we are literally eating our way through time. Food is the fuel that is moving you through time. And I learned a lot about this when I first came here as a walk-in. I'm going to tell you some anecdotes. When I first came into this body, I didn't understand that I was supposed to eat solid food. Like here's some snacks I brought with me, right? Like some little energy snacks. I didn't understand that I was supposed to be here eating solid objects, chewing them up in my mouth and actually putting them into my body. That felt like the strangest, most unlikely thing to have to do. And I literally just kept trying to eat light because I knew that that's what I was supposed to be doing. So, of course, my body didn't get enough nutrition and became very skinny and weak, and I didn't understand it. And it took a lot of learning through trial and error, really, for me to find out what this body is actually supposed to be experiencing. So this is also I can share about Earth and planet Earth, because my body is in transition to a higher state, and the planetary body is in transition to a higher state. And so it wasn't the time for me to jump directly from, eating solid food, my consciousness walking into this body and going directly to eating sunlight. That was too extreme. It is much more, I talk about a beautiful, benevolent universe. It is a beautiful, benevolent universe. That universe is not going to say, oh, okay, so you've sat on your couch the whole life and never went running, now go out and run a marathon of 26 miles. That's not benevolent at all. It is much more benevolent to say, why don't you start off with a brisk walk around the block and you work your way up? So same thing with Earth. So Earth right now is transitioning from the type of world where resources are used up and then you become indebted and then you have to, fix that debt, into a different way of using resources. When we switch from eating physical food to eating pure sunlight, it's analogous to going from working off of coal-fired steam engines to moving to beautiful, clean solar energy. And the reason why we have to do that is because at a certain point, you're not, hello to the person who just joined in, hello down there. At a certain point, you're not going to be able to get enough power and enough energy from the clunky, inefficient way of getting energy, which is, a coal power plant, is combustion. That's what the body does when you eat food. That's like, carbon, and then you burn it using your muscle power. When I go to the gym, I am burning calories. And that also produces a great deal of byproduct. We would call it pollution, but let's just call it byproduct. Carbon dioxide, free radicals, and also some acidic molecules that exist in the body. And all of that creates what is known as aging. That creates wear and tear. And I'm now going to refer to the Bible, but I am not a biblical literalist in any way. But I bring it up because it is the cultural mythology, and we are immersed in the Judeo-Christian culture that comes from the Bible, and it informs our ideas. Joseph Campbell knows all about the power of our programming of mythology. And the idea that I bring up is, in the Garden of Eden, before the fall of consciousness, and I've told you in the past that the fall of consciousness in the Bible is analogous to the genetic degradation that happened at the end of the culture of Atlantis. Atlantis, which was a worldwide, sophisticated culture that used vibration and free energy, what we would call free energy technology, but wireless energy technology in order to power their society. But it became corrupted in terms of corrupting the use of technology and taking away people's free will. And our journey here as humans and our earthly journey as a planet has everything to do with free will. Because I've been setting the stage here and telling you essentially, well, you have a whole panoply, a spectrum of entities all around you, some of whom are, really evil and negative and just terrible to be around, and some of whom are really positive and they will help you thrive. Well, that is the chakra system on your body. Depending upon which entities you align yourself with and you feed with your belief, with your thoughts. That's not a correct way of saying it. I was pressing something with my computer and I wasn't paying attention. What you feed with your belief. And the thoughts themselves, they're not your thoughts. They're abstractions that exist, like plants in your garden, and you get to choose which plants you water. So I'm looking at my garden, I'm like, oh, tomato plant, I want to water that plant. That's a weed, I don't want to put water on that plant. And this is all about our mental gardens, and we, through free will choice, get to choose who is living through this mind. And that has everything to do with your DNA. So I was doing, and I'll see if I can pull this up on the back screen so that you can see it. Oh, good, that looks pretty good. You can see that back there. So on your back screen, and I'm pointing now with my little thing, that is a torus. That's a donut shape. And now I'm highlighting it here for the EduCreations recording later for people who want to check this out. That's a little tiny toroidal donut that happens on the microscopic level due to supercoiling of your DNA. Thank you for just letting me take a pause there. And what is happening on this microscopic level is absolutely about your experience on a macroscopic level. Your DNA is like an antenna, and I've also spoken in previous lessons about how it's not something that's static. It's a set of fibers that are constantly interweaving, twisting, coiling, being spliced, being unspliced, like you are made of many, many vibrating strings, just like a guitar or a piano or anything that's made of any instrument, a harpsichord, and that really all of those vibrating strings are picking up vibrations from those thought beings that exist in the universe, the existing patterns of thought that are looking for an apparatus within which to reside. So I said some pretty important things. One is that each organic being gives life to the thoughts that you choose to think and put energy into. So now let's talk about some of these lower vibrational entities that have been sitting on top of human culture for tens of thousands of years. They have, first of all, done a lot of programming implanting mental programs that make it easier for them to get inside of your mind, whether you want them or not. That's like saying house guests who know how to jimmy the lock. They know how to get in whether you want them or not. This is what I also refer to as your hacked operating system, that your mind is not your own. When you got here and you were a little tiny child of 2 or 3 and you learned how to speak and have language so you could understand the people around you, and you developed a mind in the sense of time. When you were a little tiny child, you had no idea about time. You lived in a numinous existence. All time is now. And little by little you learned, oh, soon something is going to happen in the future. Maybe soon I will get a cookie. Or, oh, I had a cookie yesterday. That was in the past. Or it might be like your birthday is coming up, and looking on the calendar and understanding something is coming in the future. All of that is mental programming, and it's part of your operating system here in this time and place. And when I bring up time, the awareness of time can often be what takes you away from being connected to your true self, to your own true divine heritage. That really we are all meant to be always focusing our attention in the now. And when I get into how to eat properly, that's pretty much it. It's the actual food substances that you choose are important, but so much more important is being on the now diet, being on the I am focusing on this moment right now. I'm not thinking about the experiences of the past. I'm not being held as a prisoner by the experiences of the past. Think about that. Think about how many people in their lives are not able to be free in this moment because of whatever bad thing that happened in 1972, or something that whatever bad thing happened to them this morning. That literally the emotional residue is preventing people from being able to move forward. It's almost as if as you are moving forward through time, that there are long strings or trailers, emotions that are left behind a person. And that happens through lack of attention, not being focused on this moment right now. Even if you're not watching and paying attention to this moment right now, you're having accumulated experiences. If you're not paying attention or focusing on them, they're getting built up until you go back into them and process them. So in one way, you can understand this as a sense of overwhelm, like a system that is being overwhelmed by having too much energy put into it. And the system is your perception, and the too much energy is too much stimulation. So let's use as an example, driving through Manhattan. Has anyone here ever driven through Manhattan or any LA, San Francisco, huge urban metropolis? There's so much stimulation. It is more than a person can take in, because there's the things you have to pay attention to. Stop signs, pedestrians on their cell phone, crazy bicycle messengers, pigeons, things coming in front of your car. And then there's all the rest. Shiny things, billboards, things that are designed to take your attention away and focus on them. And also weird people walking down the street and strange smells. And I've had the experience of almost literally driving over a guy who was a construction worker with a stop sign. He was right in front of my car and he's holding the stop sign out saying to me, hey, it's time to stop. And I was so overwhelmed by every other thing that I was looking at that I almost didn't see him. And he just looked at me and shook his head, kind of like, lady, like, what is wrong with you? And if I had had the opportunity, I would have stopped and described to him how I was just experiencing sensory overload. And that was why his stop sign had just been, was drowned out by the roar of everything else that was going on. Well, think about that now, and attention, and how what we really need to do is pay attention to our senses and to being in the moment. And this is the primary lesson of most spirit teachers, that they teach about how to not be so mentally distracted or so emotionally hurt that one is constantly thinking about another time or another place And this can also be in terms of projection about the future. Kind of like if you're so unhappy in this time and place, always thinking about how great it's going to be when. You know, like if you're like totally, you know, in the shit and you don't want to be there, but thinking about how great it's going to be when your ship comes in, or in the future when you have $1 million, or, you know, some people obsess about food or about tobacco or about sex or whatever it is. When you get that thing you really want, I'm thinking about that donut I really want to eat, and I can't even focus on what I'm doing right now because all I can think about is how much I want that donut. Well, focusing so much on the desires of the future really pisses and shits on the experience of the present. And the present is what we really have. And the present is what the genetic degradation takes us away from. The genetic degradation is like all of those billboards in Manhattan and all of that loudness and all of that static on the line that prevented me from being able to focus on the traffic signals and what I really needed. And all of that extra stuff that is distracting us, it's happening on a genetic level, okay? This is really important to understand. It's not just television. It's not just the media. All of that stuff causes a reverberation with what you've got inside. So if you've ever played the guitar or a stringed instrument like a violin, these strings can vibrate sympathetically. You pluck this string, but because this one is next to it, it starts to vibrate too. So let's say you have a particular genetic tendency within you, and then you see something in the media or hear something on the radio that brings that up, and then you have a resonance. So it could be a fear story, you know? Let's talk about fear. Media will bring up a story and say, essentially the story is something bad happened to someone, somewhere. And then, I'm just saving the educreations lesson for the moment. Here we go. Thank you for letting me save that. Good, that's saving. So the news, this is the news in the time and place, you know, where we currently live. News means something bad happened to someone somewhere. And then that causes a resonance if you are vulnerable to it with, but what if that thing happens to me sometime? And then you've matched that frequency. And it is much more common for people to match the frequency of fear and doubt and negativity than it is for them to match the frequency of joy and positivity and boundless possibilities. Like when someone wins the lottery, it is not very often that you absolutely perfectly match your vibration to that person, and then, you know, you also have, you know, huge winnings. I mean, it would be wonderful if that happened, but, you know, oftentimes that doesn't happen. But people do resonate with things like unfortunate accidents and diseases and family tragedies. Like, if only we would each feel such a sense of perfect joy, you know, at the success of our neighbors. Like, oh, my neighbor won the lottery. I'm so very happy. I feel joy as if I just won the lottery, right? Wouldn't that be so great? But often that doesn't happen in the positive sense. What's more likely to happen is you hear, oh, so-and-so had a car accident, and you think, oh no, what if that happened to me, or what if that happened to someone that I love? And immediately you're forming a bridge, you're forming a resonance. This string has been plucked, but this is you, and this is you resonating on that. All of that is happening on a genetic level. I don't want to take too much time to fiddle with, you know, the pictures and bring up exactly the same pictures up there. But basically what I'm saying is that you're an antenna, and the radio broadcasts come from out there. Very few of our thoughts are actually self-arising. You know, sometimes we do have original thoughts. Like, you know, I invented the flying rainbow lasagna. That's an original thought. And when we think something like, I feel hungry, or my belly is empty, or I need to do this thing, like, that's usually an original thought. But then there's sometimes extra thoughts that are on top of that, that are implications that are not about that. So, okay, I'm just consulting with some of my notes and some things that are really important that I want to get onto here. The idea that your chakras back here, all of these, that they are actually aspects of your own self. And I also like to predict that at a point in the near future, we won't have this artificial distinction between the lower self and the higher self, or people who feel that they have to have their ego step aside in order to channel something higher. That really, when we get to a certain level, one's ego or temporal self or organic self will be so honed and perfected and essential that, and it will be like a divine container for that higher consciousness. And there won't be this dichotomy of, the agenda of the lower self versus the agenda of the higher self. Like, we're really moving into a time where this is all seamlessly integrated. And so it's not worth making a distinction about that. But it is important to make the distinction between your physical body and the chakras on the body, because this is living intelligent light. These chakras are consciousness entities in and of themselves. And so, like I was speaking before about the probiotics in your gut and the beneficial yeasts and fungi that live on our skin, it's how it's supposed to be. You don't want to have a sterile being with no, living life on you. Each one of us is a beautiful planet. So you're like a planet, and you want to have healthy life on the surface of your planet, right? Because people can be shocked. Like, if you ever took a Q-tip and you took a culture off of the bottom of your foot, you would find out there's 63 different types of fungus that live just on your big toe. There's a lot of life that lives on the surface of your planet. That's acceptable. That's the way it's supposed to be. You're not a sterile environment. But, of course, you want your flora and fauna to be in a healthy balance. You don't want them to be anything to be out of balance. If it is, that's what causes skin rashes and eruptions and discomfort. And same thing with what's going on with consciousnesses that exist exterior to us, okay? So we exist within this sea of microbes, but don't be afraid. We exist within this sea of personalities and consciousnesses, but don't be afraid, because just like you have a physical immune system keeping out the microbes, you also have an energetic immune system. That's called your chakras. And also, I'm going to teach you specific techniques for creating an even stronger energetic immune system called the Merkaba. Merkaba. This is information that comes from ancient Egypt, and previous to that it came from Atlantis, and previous to that it came from pretty much God and divinity. It means light body vessel, and it is a type of geometric structure you can envision around yourself and around your pineal gland that will help to keep out the unwanted vibrations. And essentially what we're saying is, from our hacked operating system, we are vulnerable or porous in our energy field to these entities coming in. Bad house guests who you don't want. And often, oh, that's so sweet. There's like a little tail over there on your screen. That's really lovely. Often these non-physical entities come from family members that they get implanted in each one of us from the genetic resonance of family members. Because also, when you're growing up, family members do the most part of human programming. So, you get some human programming from watching television or from watching movies or reading books. A lot of it, we model our behavior on the people that live around us. And the people that primarily take care of us are family members. So oftentimes, these negative or degrading thoughts have the voice of family members. If you hear like a critical inner thought and it's like, wait, who does that sound like? Like, is that mother, father, auntie, grandma? Who's in there? Who's in there shaking their finger at me? And I'm saying this in a laughing way, but really many people go through years and years of talk therapy, like grinding their gears, talking all about this stuff without realizing that what they've really got is a hacked operating system. They've got programs that they're running in their genes at this point without consciously recognizing it. It's each one of our journeys to be here in a physical body. Hey, you know something? Each one of us has ancestors. This is pretty important to understand. And any avatar that comes here, like, I'm a walk-in, I didn't grow this body, but I came into this body, and it has ancestors, and it has genes, and it has or had programming that was heavily influenced by the voices of ancestors and the voices of family members. So let's give an example of ancestral programming. This corporeal form came from a genetic Jewish background or Jewish cultural background. And there's a lot of heavy guilt and a sense of persecution that is taught in the Jewish culture. And when I say this is all about the way that the Bible or the Torah is presented when young people go to get their, religious instruction in Hebrew school, the way that older relatives might give programming about what happened in World War II or what happened in other times in history. And so let's say this is a great example of resonance. An older generation relative, someone who's got to be in their 80s or 90s by this point, they might have experienced persecution firsthand in terms of seeing family members be killed in World War II or not being able to get a job because of their culture or religious background. So I knew family members who told me that when they first moved to Ellis, they came through Ellis Island from Europe, and that they couldn't get a job because people thought they were Jewish, and they had to kind of lie about their name and say that they weren't Jewish just to get like an entry-level position, all right? So we live in a very vastly different time and place right now. But that person, with their experience of several generations ago, was trying to get this genetic material to resonate sympathetically to that. And I got to make a choice. As the inhabitant of this vessel, I got to choose. Do I want to bang that gong? Like when you bang a gong and it makes a reverberation. The gong itself is the gong of persecution. Do I want to bang that gong? Do I want to think that in this time and place and in my experience in this physical form that I am being cut off from opportunities because of my genetic Jewish heritage? And I decided very early on that doesn't sound like truth, and that's not a gong that I wish to bang. And so I get to say that it stops here. So each one of us gets to choose in our genetic heritage what we are increasing and what we are no longer giving life to. And this can be anything from a heritage of alcoholism or physical abuse, or taking advantage of others. Like there are some, cultures where it's like, we're the insiders, they're the outsiders. I can, you're all my family members, but you're all my tribe, but we can do whatever we want to those guys over there. Like, of course, that's not cool. Of course, we know that's not okay, but yet that is some programming that happens from ancestors through genes. So I want to get into food, and I'm sure that there are questions about all of that, and we can even talk about Gaza and Palestine because that's a very relevant topic and everything. But basically, I'm setting this all up for you to understand how important food is, and food eating is one of the most empowering acts you can do throughout your day. That eating does not have to be a chore or something that you merely have to accomplish in order to sustain your biological life. Eating can be an art form, eating can be uplifting, eating can be empowering. Once you recognize that there's a lot of negative entities who want to steal your food. They want to steal it from you by distracting you while you're eating. So now let's talk about eating while distracted. Like, how there's like distracted driving, like you're on your cell phone while you're driving. Most people in this time and place practice distracted eating. Most people are either watching the TV, looking at Facebook, on the phone, driving their car, and that's analogous to when I was driving in Manhattan and there's all of this other distraction and it was sensory overload and I wasn't even paying attention to what was right in front of me. It has to do with attention and focus. And I've said in previous lessons, attention is the limb that grows out of your third eye. Literally, it comes from atenuos, Greek, to reach out with your mind. Whatever you're focusing your attention on, you're touching. And this also has to do with being a good guest. We'll get more into interdimensional ethics and reaching into other people's minds and what you think about and how you're actually touching what you think about with your mind. But basically, here, if this is my snack food, when I'm chewing, if I am focusing on my food, if I am feeling the tastes and textures in my mouth and I'm focusing on the act of eating, I'm doing a couple of things. First of all, I'm completely in the now. I am not thinking about the past and I am not thinking about the future. I am thinking about the now, and so I am creating a very clear sensory broadcast of what this is like. So I can also tell you, and I love to be able to share openly with cool people like you guys, lots of other extra-dimensional beings share the senses of this body. It's done through consensual agreement. I only allow the cool people, like this side of the screen, like the benevolent higher dimensional entities, to tune in to my neurology for what I'm eating. Because let's face it, not everyone has ever had a corporeal existence. And corporeal existence in other times and places is radically different. Even look at life here. Life of a tree or a plant. There's plants on the windowsill here. They never would know what it's like to eat an energy treat with nuts and pomegranate seeds and honey and good stuff in it. They know what it's like to absorb sunlight. So the experience of chewing up these substances and the sensory experience is a novel, interesting experience, especially for a lot of beings who are beings of pure energy, where they don't know what it's like to be here in a corporeal form and have senses and taste things. Also, when you taste, your senses are sophisticated molecular analyzers, and they also are able to analyze light. So I'll use as the example tomatoes. Like everybody knows that homegrown tomatoes taste the most delicious, and store-bought tomatoes usually taste like cardboard or styrofoam, And there's reasons for that, but a lot of it has to do with the love and care that goes into growing one's own food and preparing one's own food. And that when food is produced on a mass level, like industrialized farming, and when the present circumstances are used in order to increase yields artificially. I'm talking about, when people use a lot of inorganic, nitrogen-heavy fertilizers. Farmers do that because it makes the tomatoes grow bigger and faster, bigger and fatter faster. So, oh good, I'm getting more tomatoes per pound, but they're not necessarily imbuing those tomatoes with more consciousness. So this is kind of tough because science is only beginning to recognize consciousness. There was even an article on, an online magazine that was about science beginning to recognize consciousness as a force similar to gravity. But let's say we could weigh consciousness and be like, okay, I'm at the store and I'm going to weigh this fruit versus this fruit and determine which one I want to buy based upon actual consciousness. Like this is pretty much like the difference between organic and inorganic foods. That inorganic farming processes grow a product that is a lower quality vibration. It has less consciousness, less awareness to it. Let's talk about things that are grown under artificial lights. Those foods do not have the same amount of consciousness as foods grown under the sun, because the sun is the source of all of our consciousness. And same thing with when I talk about the artificial nitrogen, when plants are supposed to get their food from the soil and from partnership with beneficial soil microorganisms, not merely by dumping nitrogen-heavy petrochemicals on top of them. If you just give plants a whole bunch of chemicals, yes, you're giving them nitrogen, but they didn't have to go through that whole process of breaking down soil, root structure, all of that. So being outside, being exposed to real sun, real wind, and real microorganisms in the soil puts consciousness into plants. It's like saying the plants had to develop a backbone to stand up against the wind, and the sun moved across the sky, and it had to train its leaves according to how the sun went, and it had to send out roots and feelers to find out, hey wait, there's nutrients over in that direction, or maybe there's nutrients growing in that direction. The plant had to become intelligent and respond to its environment. Same thing with animals. Clearly, one would wish to ingest animals of a higher vibration. So, okay, part of this when I talk about food, because I'm not judgmental. I'm not going to say, okay, you ate a candy bar, that's it, your consciousness will never evolve. It's not like that at all. It's more like saying when you put certain fuel into your being, it slows you down a little bit. And I certainly have felt this experience. Fried food, especially fried food that is fried in really heavy oil, like, not like olive oil or something like that, I find that tends to really slow down my consciousness. And when people crave food that is lower vibration food, essentially what they're saying is like, my consciousness is getting too high. I'm expanding my consciousness too much. I got to bring it down a little bit. And people are often adding emotional ballast to their hot air balloon of their mind because they're a little bit threatened. It's like, oh, wait, like I've heard miraculous stories of people who go on a raw food diet and it really awakens their mind, makes them more sensitive and emotionally perceptive. And let's talk about this. Let's say, well, I have a friend who lives in Manhattan and he's been telling me lately that he's been finding that he doesn't appreciate the neurological feeling of having so many people around him. And he's lived there for 20 years, but he's now becoming more sensitized and awakened. And he doesn't like being around a lot of unconscious people, right? So he's got to make a choice whether he wants to move or not. Some people who find themselves uncomfortable or, around the unconscious choose to be a little bit unconscious. Like, let me eat some ice cream. Let me eat something fried. Let me eat something that's like gonna dumb down my consciousness a little bit. But again, I'm not judgmental because any substance can literally be alchemically transformed into divine manna from heaven with your consciousness, with your mind. Even to the point where if you had a program, a belief system that was powerful enough, this is just water in here, you could live entirely on nothing but water. But you would have to really believe that water had been charged by sunlight, that it contained all of the nutrients that you needed. Like it's like a hop, skip, and a jump. It's like saying like, oh, why don't we all just return to the Garden of Eden? This is what I was referring to in a few minutes ago. The cultural myth of this time and place that stays alive inside of all of us and helps us to remember that there was a time when we as humanoids did not have to chew up physical objects and put them in our mouths and have gut bacteria digest them in order to live. So this is remembered as Eden, but really this is a time before the genetic degradation that made humanity what we currently see around us. And in that time, we were absolutely able to connect directly to solar consciousness, so the sun is our nearest star, but also stellar consciousness, stars that are farther away than merely our, nearest star, and to be able to tap into the light energy that is in those presences and feed ourselves directly on that. So if we are able to do that, several things happen. And I know I was describing this to Mike because this is all preface. I am preparing everyone for our mutual future, and we'll all be there together. I can tell. It's going to be amazing. We are going to live in a time where we no longer have to take on the karmic debt of something had to die so that I can live. And I'm at peace with this. And I'll also tell you, how I was saying extra dimensional beings, they like to taste through my tongue, and we can all think of ourselves as taste buds on the tongue of God. Well, the extra dimensional beings find it quite barbaric that I actually eat dead animals. And this body needs protein. And I tried to be vegetarian and I tried different things with hemp seed and nutritional yeast, and it was not intense enough protein for me. So I eat eggs and chicken and fish and peanut butter like almost every day, and lots of cheese. It's just what is necessary, and also necessary for me in terms of grounding, because I have a lot of very high vibration energy, and sometimes I need to eat those denser foods like a hamburger or peanut butter in order to be grounded and to be here. And that's so again, there's no judgment here. There's nothing to say right or wrong, but I'm using anecdotally and sharing it with you as a ha-ha that some of these higher dimensional beings, not only do they find it very strange, the idea of chewing up objects and putting it in your mouth and swallowing it, but the idea of killing an animal and applying heat and eating it afterwards to them is like totally nauseating. So I grill my food outside usually because when you grill, it makes a lot of smell in the house. And often when these dimensional entities would come and visit me, we'd joke. They'd say, "Your house smells like a dead cow." I'd say, "I know, I was eating a hamburger." So I grill it outside. But the whole point here being that there is no judgment, that if you need to eat hamburger, or if you need to eat sugar, or if you need to eat ramen noodles, or whatever is the thing that you want to eat, that's totally cool. Your body might be requiring that in some way, or you might be adding emotional ballast, or anything can be on your diet if you are focused on it with your attention. So when I say these other lower vibrational negative thought entities, those are beings who would be analogous to the hungry ghosts of Japan. They can't eat pure love. They can't eat pure sunshine and starlight. They can't tune into the love of a being who is corporeal either. We can send out love that beautiful, non-corporeal, angelic beings can consume. And it often happens during moments of really passionate prayer or connection to the divine. Sometimes when you are really connected to nature, you literally exude a food that's a vibration that other beings can eat. And they love to cultivate us for that vibration. Unfortunately, there are other beings that have been cultivating humanity for tens of thousands of years, and I would call them misery farmers or pain farmers. And they not only try to, make you unhappy in life through illness, and this all goes back to the genetic degradation from Atlantis, but they also try to steal your food away through distraction. So let's say the example is I'm eating my dinner, and as I'm chewing, some negative thought comes to me, and it says something along the lines of, "You're a bad person." Something like, "You didn't do a thing you need to do," or "You forgot to call someone," or "You made a mistake in 1982, whatever it was. I'm busy chewing. I'm trying to be in the now. I'm trying to fully absorb all of the wonderful consciousness and light that's in my food. And all of a sudden, I'm being distracted, just like in New York City. Billboard, someone's walking by, here's something loud, here's another thing. I don't need that. And so I, at this point, am very, clear about, I won't be distracted by that. So, okay, here is how to eat properly. Here is your real diet plan. First of all, yes, choose organic food that actually does have consciousness in it. Why is it important for it to be organic? Yes, it actually is, because real nutrients come from real fertilizer, not artificial chemical fertilizer. So even though an organic tomato might be smaller, it has real nutrition and real nutrients. And also humans might find, especially American humans might find, that your nutritional needs are satisfied with a smaller amount of food. Humans in the United States are used to a giant plate of food, bigger than your head, coming to the table. That's usually overeating, it's usually too much, and that it's much more sensible to have a small amount of very high quality, very concentrated nutrition. Okay, so that's the first thing. Because you're a refinery of light. That's what this is. That's why I have this picture up here. Really as a reminder that you are a refinery. So a refinery takes in raw materials and then separates those materials out into their constituent elements. So we are solidified sunlight. We are made out of light that has the privilege of not moving at 186,000 miles per second. We're light that is moving slower than the light waves that are in each of our rooms that are hitting our eyeballs right now. And when we eat food, we are eating solidified light because we currently exist in this level of density where we need that intermediary of an object. The sun created an object and we eat the object. And ideally, we are such a pure conduit of consciousness that we give the experience of eating that object right back to the sun. I do it with a live broadcast. Instead of recording my broadcast and giving it to the sun upon the moment of my death, saying oh, here was my human existence. The sun wants to know what's happening in real time. The sun can tune into your consciousness because we are all of its children. We are connected to the sun. The sun loves and cares about each one of us, and the sun wants to know what's happening on a moment-by-moment micromanagement level. Believe me, the sun is that complex and that intelligent. And the sun also wants to know what these objects taste like. So I was also saying that your senses are sophisticated molecular analyzers. They are. You can tell what has more light in it and what has less light in it by how good it tastes. And usually deliciousness is not determined by the amount of chemicals and sugar in something. Usually deliciousness is determined by freshness of ingredients and how well it has been prepared. But I know in this time and place, people are really used to packaged foods and commercial, like fast foods, commercially prepared foods. So it's a little bit artificial. It's like saying that people have been programmed to say, oh, good food tastes like this, because many people prefer canned vegetables to fresh vegetables because it's got salt on it. It's like highly seasoned. It's got a lot of sodium. So people need to have a chance to recalibrate. But if you were not taking into account the false calibration that most people have experienced about just waiting for this thing to fix, most people, if they have not been falsely calibrated to feel that processed food is more delicious than fresh food, mostly people are able to sense, oh, a real tomato grown with, real love tastes better. Same thing, homemade cookies. Homemade cookies, grandma's cookies almost always taste better than store-bought cookies. Store-bought cookies are not only made by a machine, they are made with lots of chemicals in order to achieve maximum shelf life. So, okay, why is food degraded? Why would humans say, hey, you know something? I don't like other humans, and I certainly don't value my own family members. Let me fill our food supply with lots of fillers and chemicals. Yeah, that sounds great. No, of course not. Of course, no one would do that. But the profit motive makes people act that way. The profit motive is literally not human created. Anytime people are acting merely for profit, what they're really doing is acting in service of the alien overlords who created economy, who created money, who created lack of abundance. And essentially they said, oh yes, make a poison tomato because you will get more money for it. That's the profit motive. So when we're getting down to that, we have very little about what the human food system right now is not created and controlled and made for humans. It has been created by non-human, extraterrestrial, and extra-dimensional beings who wish to keep humanity diminished and enslaved. And part of it is by feeding humanity lower vibrational food that has a minimum amount of consciousness in it. Because as I've said, you're a refinery of light. So that means you can refine out whatever's in there, but you can't refine what's not in there. It's like if I took a rock that had no gold in it and I put it through my gold refinery, it would not refine out anything that's not in there. So if I gave you all a bunch of dead food that had no consciousness in it, well, you can refine all you want. There's minimal consciousness in there. This is absolutely the plan, the nefarious, intentional plan by these nefarious beings that want to keep humanity in a state of lack of awareness. So, okay, all of this comes down to how can you be free? And I know that it's 7 o'clock. It's almost time for me to open the floor to any questions or clarifications, but let me give you a recipe. How can you be free? Choose the highest quality food that has light in it that's available to you. If it costs too much, that's okay. You don't have to buy the organic $12 a pound almonds. You can buy the regular almonds. That's okay. When you eat, focus on the sensations of eating and understand that you are recording the experience of being a corporeal person eating solid objects for yourself in the future. You will not always be this being. You'll transform into a new, different type of being. And you won't eat food like you eat this here, but you will bring with you the memory of food. And so if you have ever visited someplace on a vacation, like wherever, if you went to France or Italy, and you knew, in all likelihood, you're not going to be going back there very soon. So when you're eating that cannoli, it's like you really want to taste that cannoli. You really want to eat it and remember what it felt like when you were eating it and chewing it, like a vacation photo for your mind, right? A vacation memory that can't be degraded or ever taken away from you. That's how you should eat your food as a human. Because I can tell you, first of all, as a walk-in, I've learned food can be very enjoyable, right? Remember I shared, like I first came in, I didn't understand about eating solid objects and didn't get it all together. It took me a long time to understand because at certain times I was also in the hunt for survival, where you just have to get enough resources to be able to exist. At a certain point, I was able to appreciate the aesthetics of food and how wonderful it can taste. And oh my goodness, I used to eat chocolate-covered orange peel. I don't eat it anymore because I don't eat sugar, but I have recorded enough experiences of that wonderful substance. And not only that, but where I was when I was eating it. Or one time it was a gift that my friend gave me, so it made it, even that more enjoyable. Or think about this, like eating a particular fruit that's in season only a short amount of time, or you can only get it from one place, like the Macoun apples that you can only get in upstate New York during a certain time of the year. It's not like a red delicious apple you can get at the grocery store anytime. These are Macoun apples. These are special apples. And how you eat those apples, and it's like, oh, like you really savor it. Well, be that way with your human existence, because one day you will be a pure light being. We all will. We will no longer have to use plants as an intermediary to solidify light that we can eat. We will have this aperture functioning on our foreheads, meaning that we can ingest all of the nutrition we need directly from the sun. We won't have to achieve any of the karmic debt of killing in order to live. And also, when I was saying what's the recipe to eat? When you eat, I eat animals. You bless that animal. You bless them not by saying, oh God above, please bless my food. No, you're God and you bless your food by eating it with loving bites. You're saying, this tastes really good, paying attention to the way that it tastes, loving it into your body. And you know something? All of my muscles are made out of chicken and fish and beef. And when my body does good stuff, those animals are living through me. This is absolutely appropriate. But one day we won't have to have that experience. And this is what the cultural myth of the Bible is talking about when we talk about the lion lying down with the lamb, or a time when we have now shifted out of the necessity of killing another organism so that we can survive and consciousness will grow. So so the recipe is eat the highest quality light food you possibly can, pay attention while you're eating, and you are a taste bud on the tongue of God, essentially sanctifying the mundane with your experience of it. And when beings come along who say, any bad things to you, any distraction, when you're trying to eat, it's like these distracting things coming along, they're essentially saying, hey, you're not allowed to have that food, you're not good enough, or I want that food, or instead of you paying attention to that experience of a wonderful cannoli, I'm gonna make you feel bad about it, I'm gonna make you think about your fat butt or whatever. That's not your friend, that's not a loving entity, and all those entities are trying to do is literally steal food out of your mouth. And it is absolutely essential that you say to them mentally, no thank you, or go away, or you are not welcome here. And in subsequent lessons, I will teach you even more effective techniques for permanently kicking them out of your brain. But for the moment, it is a simple no thank you. So, okay, I know I've done a lot of speaking, and I would love to open the floor to any questions, comments, or insights from the beautiful people that are all tuned in here. No one wants to go first? Any questions? It's cool if you don't have questions. I might, speak a little bit longer about food and, Yes, no? Well, okay, what's going to happen is that, I think something just changed with the sound. I thought maybe someone was saying something.
I unmuted myself.
Oh, okay. You have a comment or something that you'd like to know more about?
I always need to eat dinner about this time, and I would love to stay around for big, long discussions with everybody. So I got to find some way around that.
I understand completely. How about this? While you are eating your dinner, practice all of these things that we've been talking about. No thank you to the negative entities who want to steal the food out of your intestines, and refine the light into your consciousness body.
Right.
Awesome. There is someone who just typed in something on chat, so I'm going to bring that up and read it. Okay, so this is from Noel saying, I've always seen eating as a distraction and waste of time. I'm not sure why. And Mike is saying that he has similar issues. Well, guess what? There's a lot of cultural programming that states essentially, don't love yourself. Oh, it is indulgent. Oh, it is not okay to eat and love what you eat. In a sense, like almost like you're a better person if you are not tuned in or appreciating your food. Couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I'm not judging anyone, but I'm trying to say that appreciating your food and loving every aspect of food is a high state of sophistication, okay? So if you are lucky enough to grow your own food or some of it in a garden, that's not primitive. Even though this industrialized culture says, what? Being a subsistence farmer? That's so primitive. This culture does not understand what is truly valuable. But of course, people in this culture, they shop at farmers markets. They buy, organic heirloom tomatoes that were grown in somebody's garden. So the whole point is, when you grow your own food, you're forming a personal relationship with the food that you're going to eat. And that food is conscious, it's consciousness, and then when you eat it, it's giving itself as a gift to you. And we have definitely tied food to economy and the expectation that in order to get food, I have to have money, and farmers grow food for money. So there's a lot of the love that usually goes into food production isn't there. But ideally, in a state of real sophistication that our culture will return to, we will create beautiful food that is in tune with each person. So Findhorn is an interesting community to research. They're an intentional community in Scotland, and they were very well known for their giant heads of cabbage and cauliflower. And this is, from maybe even 30 years ago. They were able to grow these wonderful vegetables even under very adverse conditions, poor soil, and places where they theoretically weren't allowed to or weren't capable of due to climate. And amazingly enough, they were able to grow these giant vegetables because of consciousness. They would telepathically connect with their vegetables. Growing food is about much more than just, stick a seed in soil, give it some water, or, throw some Miracle Grow on it. That's unconscious living. And I've even read that walking barefoot in your own garden, the pheromones and sweat secretions at the bottom of your feet go into the soil and are sensed by the plant's roots, and that the plant can then create whatever nutrients you need in your body in response to what you're saying. So it's like saying there's a beautiful dynamic partnership between you as a cultivator of food and the food itself. And that's how it's supposed to be. Same thing with domestic animals. Like ideally, ideally we would eat food like fish that swim free or deer that live their lives free. But if we're using domesticated animals, that's okay, as long as we give those animals a life where they have real consciousness. That means they have to be able to be challenged, to not only challenge their muscles, but challenge their mind. Think about things and walk around and look at things. That is part of the energy of what we need to be eating also. So giving our animals a good existence, and then we eat it and we have a good existence. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it was for a very long time. But our current industrial farming practices are antithetical to consciousness. And so when I go to the grocery store, I look at the chicken and I can tell which chickens had a decent life and which chickens did not have a decent life. And you can just tell by looking at the flesh. Some of the flesh is like sad and pale and spongy and gross. And some of it, the organic chicken, they're usually smaller. but the flesh is actually firm and nice and seems kind of like, oh, like those chickens walked around and had a good life. Same to all of these things, the eggs, the beef. We were in California, Northern California, there's beautiful beef. I drove here and saw cows eating grass in a field. Those cows had a good life. They felt the wind, they felt the real sun, and they ate real grass that had real consciousness, as opposed to cows that are only kept inside of sad warehouse buildings and fed things like GMO soybeans or even gummy worms or whatever. You know, I'm not joking about that. Animal feed became too expensive one year, and so farmers in the Midwest were feeding their animals expired candy, like Sour Patch Kids and gummy worms. Like they were feeding that to the cows. So this has everything to do with humanity not being in control of humanity's food supply, because humanity wouldn't choose to do that to itself, but those farmers chose to do that for the profit motive. That's what this all comes down to. Once you are doing things just for money, just in order to make more profit, you're not serving humanity, you're not serving life and consciousness, you're serving the market, you're serving capitalism, you're serving the concept of money. So, I mean, needless to say, food is a commodity and it's a big necessity of life. When we transition into beings of pure light, we will no longer be limited by the food as a commodity idea. But of course, by that point, oh, okay, Ed, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in and for participating. Yes.
I hope this will be recordable. I mean,
yes.
Where do the chats, or where does this come in EduCreations?
EduCreations records what's on my screen back here, but all of our faces are recorded on the video conference, which I post on YouTube as a private link for just our class. And so I'll have that processed in a day or two, and I'm getting better at editing it so it doesn't have dead space at the beginning and end. So anyone who wants to miss or catch up on something, this will be archived on YouTube.
Okay, cool.
All right. Oh, and another question about attention deficit disorder. It says, is attention deficit disorder a product of other thought entities, or how did it come about? That's an excellent question. Yeah, I would say that the entire human species right now has attention deficit disorder, that mostly humans are not able to focus on one thing, just on what they need to do. There's so much distraction. So it's like, oh, my phone is going off. I have to check my text. The television is going off over there. And there are also all of these electromagnetic fields that have an impact on us. So I really felt the change when I went on a day trip with a friend to Vermont, because we were driving out of New York State, we were driving north, and as we drove into more and more rural areas, and we were, oh, hello, you're in a beautiful place then if you're in Vermont, because I felt as we got into Vermont, we were getting away from all of the electromagnetic fields that are really pervasive in New York State, and I felt like I could think more clearly. Usually I have to really focus, like I have very strong will. And so when these negative or distractive thought entities come along, it's like, like you're driving down the road, it's like being buffeted by a strong wind and it tries to steer your car, but I'm like, I'm not going in that direction. I didn't have to try as hard to keep my mind in alignment when I was in Vermont. And I felt similar feelings when I've been to other places that are away from electromagnetic fields. The redwoods, there's a particular place called Rockefeller Grove that is a very large redwood grove, not that far off of the highway, but because it's this field of trees, it really does help to create like a barrier, like a energetic barrier from all of the energetic distraction. I find it a lot easier to focus there. And when I have been in Manhattan, I used to say I have an 18-hour shelf life. I would go down there for like a gallery experience or some kind of cultural experience. And after being there like 12 hours, 18 hours at the most, I was like, I have to get out of here, because no matter how much I was trying to keep my consciousness in alignment, there's so much distraction that I found it really drained my energy. So I would say this. First of all, attention in school, like school uses the diagnosis of ADHD as an excuse in many ways to not be responsible educators for young people. Many very intelligent young people get the label ADHD, and then it says, I'm now going to give you psychotropic drugs and tell you that you have a learning disability. When really what's going on is young people are being fed horrible processed food with lots of sugar and dyes in it, which makes it really difficult to concentrate because your metabolism is going really wild like this, and being prevented from exercising. It's amazing. Even in school, like traditional schools have found that 20 minutes of recess, like where kids can run around and be wild, before math class helps them to focus. This is like a no-brainer, you know? This totally makes sense to me, and I'm from a totally different time and place. It's hard to believe that people in this time and place and parents don't just simply recognize this. But yes, young people need physical activity. Young people do not need to sit for 5 to 8 hours a day in a desk learning how to be good members of society. And I was speaking to Mike about this in conversation, I think a couple of days ago, that sending young people to school and the classroom environment is analogous to breaking a horse. How we take a horse who has never had a saddle and a rider, and we acclimate that animal. So the first thing you do is you tie a rope around the animal and you get it to feel comfortable with that. And the horse goes crazy. It runs all around, doesn't like having a thing around its waist. And then after it calms down, however long that takes, if it's hours, days, or weeks, you then put a blanket underneath the rope. And then the horse has to go through the whole transition of getting used to that. Then you put a very light saddle on it, goes into transition, and then the final stage is a human gets on top of the horse and stays on top of you. Well, school is the cultural programming system for breaking children to be able to enter the workplace. School does not have anything at all to do with education. It is not about cultivating your mind, helping you to achieve your full potential, teaching you really how to think for yourself. School is about installing that hacked operating system. And part of the hacked operating system is taking away your physical vitality. Little kids have wonderful physical vitality. They love to run around. First, what you do is you make them go to preschool. That's like analogous to tying a rope around their belly. And at preschool, you don't do anything except play with other kids, but you get used to, I have to get dressed. I have to go out of the house at a certain time every day. Then I come home later and I hug mommy. Then you learn to go to kindergarten. In kindergarten, you start to learn how you have to sit quietly and pay attention. So now this has everything to do with it, calling it attention deficit disorder. You know, this, I was telling you, this is your attention, attenuos, to reach out. So it's like saying, if I say to a kid, you're not paying attention enough, what you're essentially saying is, I want your mind to be focused on me. I want you to focus on the blackboard. I want you to think about the program that I'm putting into you right now. Don't think about what you want to think about, what you want to draw a picture or do what you want with your mind. You're not allowed to do that. And this is all programming to prepare people for the idea of working for a boss. When you work for a boss, like in a cubicle, you know, in a corporation, you don't get to think what you want to think. Your time is directed. Your thoughts are directed. You think what your boss wants you to think. So if you work for the New York Times, then your editor tells you, hey, go research this story. Or if you work for a paper fastener company, then they say, call these people up and sell them paper fasteners. You know, you're not choosing what you want to think. You are literally being directed by the company, which is literally being directed by the marketplace, by profit, by capitalism. It's a non-earthly boss, okay? So what we're really saying here is, what I am really saying here is that school is a programming system to prepare humans, young humans, to work for non-earthly bosses called corporations, all right? That's it. You know, if you are working, like if you're an independent entrepreneur, that's not the same as working for a corporation, because you get to choose what you think and when you think it and how you do a project and when you do a project. So to say to a young person, like you're 7 years old, first of all, and you can't sit still, and you're thinking the thoughts you want to think, not the thoughts I wish for you to think, well, clearly there's something medically wrong with you that I must prescribe a prescription drug for. And that's the world that we live in. It's literally mind control. School is mind control, but the drugs, giving psychotropic drugs to young people in order to train them to be able to sit at a desk, because the desk is analogous to the saddle of the horse. You go to kindergarten and you learn to sit quietly and pay attention and not talk to your neighbor. And then eventually you enter grade school, and that's like having a saddle put on top of you. And you learn to sit at a desk and you learn to take notes. And most people end up having to wear glasses because reading on the blackboard in that way creates cognitive dissonance. It's a rewiring of the brain that is uncomfortable, and it literally causes the biology to become out of focus. And then at the end of this process, when a person has learned how to read books and take notes and regurgitate appropriate answers, a person is then ready for the workplace. And it's like saying, you've been prepared to carry a rider in the saddle that's on top of you. So you're used to getting up in the morning, not when you want to, going to a place that's not your home, doing things that are assignments from other people that don't arise from you, and then, you get your reward later on. You get to come home later and, relax or turn off your brain or not have to think or whatever. So there's so much about our educational system that needs to be revamped. And I'm happy to say some more forward-thinking educational places are coming up with non-desk-like school settings where kids can work at a tall table, standing up if they want to. Some kids have a stool that they can sit on, like with a leg swing, so they can swing their legs. I'm trying to say that educators are now becoming more aware of how the setup of the furniture of a classroom affects young people's ability to learn or take in new information. And so more humane teachers and educational systems are now setting up better tables and chairs, allowing young people to have recreational time where they can run around and use their physical energy. And really, when I have a friend and she saw the future in a dream, and she said that it was like people were looking back at this time in horror at the working conditions in the same way that we look back at like the Industrial Revolution and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, where, around the 1900s, all of these, it was a sweatshop and lots of people worked there, and then there was a fire and it killed a lot of people because there was unsafe work conditions. We're horrified by that. Well, these future people were horrified by the way that people currently are forced to sit in a cubicle for 8 hours a day under fluorescent lights, not get any exercise, eating nothing but processed food, and really not directing their own journey of the day, not directing their own abilities, because this is like a type of slavery. Even though people would say, look, you have such a cushy existence, you're not like having to shovel hot asphalt, in the sun, like, having an office job is a good job. Having an office job is another form of slavery. And these people from the future were able to look back and see that. So majorly need to revamp the educational system. And it's interesting because I came from Woodstock and now I live in California. A lot of my friends in Woodstock ended up homeschooling their children, not out of some kind of religious complaints, like it used to be that homeschool was just for like extremely right-wing religious people who didn't want to subject their children to sex education or the idea of, evolution or something like that. Now, a lot of really progressive people choose to homeschool their kids for this very reason, so that their children don't become indoctrinated in the idea of sit all day, eat processed food, don't think for yourself, and be prepared to subjugate yourself to an economic overlord for the rest of your life. And I'm very happy and very gratified to see that. We need to rescue all the kids that are in the public school system. So I know that there are lots of really caring educators who are doing that work right now. And we also need to, one of the things, the Common Core. This is a new set of standards that the federal government has been applying to schools, and parents are rebelling. Parents are keeping their kids home on test days. They're telling their children not to take the test, or to sit and protest, to not do it, because first of all, the Common Core, it's all done on a computer, it's all done with touch screen. It has nothing at all to do with making a person a well-rounded individual, and has everything to do with programming young people to be prepared for their jobs as automatons, pressing keys on a screen and preparing them for essentially, it is mental slavery. It is a diminished state of existence that I would liken to waking death. We're talking zombiehood, when you're not fully awake and you're not fully aware, but still the body is moving. That's the level of consciousness that this world wants. This world does not want awake individuals. Awake individuals, they're very difficult to control. They're a bunch of troublemakers. Much easier to have the zombies coming through. That's easy. And so keep people asleep with the, processed foods. Do not allow people to be strong and healthy and vital in their bodies, and keep people in a state of fear about resources, because that's really why do people subject themselves to these jobs, to these experiences? Well, it's why did people work for the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory? Because they needed a job, because they needed money. So again, serving the market, serving a non-humanitarian overlord, and humanitarian meaning caring about your feelings. No one cares about your feelings more than you do. And this is really good. I used to work at this job being a custom framer, and I was picking something up in a way that wasn't good for my back. And my supervisor stopped me. She said, "Don't do that. You know something? This job isn't worth hurting your back over. You're going to have your back a lot longer than you're going to have this job. So, take good care of yourself." What beautiful words. That's a person who really cares about you, because most of these corporate settings, they're oh, we'll make you do something dangerous and difficult for very little money, and we really don't give a shit about you. So, I've certainly worked at those jobs, and that was part of my earlier experience being here. And then, as soon as I could, found a more, a way to be in control of my existence. But this is all part of it. I'm here alongside everyone, working within this paradigm of this time and place. And I had these experiences of what's it like to have a regular job. I didn't go through the regular school system because I'm an adult, but I have memories of the person who had this body. So I know what the school system is about, and I've done a lot of professional babysitting and nannying, and so I know what young people are going through in the school system in this time and place. And this is all about I'm not just a carpetbagger. I'm not just some being from another place who's oh, I'm just gonna pop on down and wave my magic wand and tell everyone what to do. Not at all. I'm really with camaraderie right here alongside everyone. So each one of us is working to achieve these levels of freedom, of internal freedom, freedom of your mind and of your perception, and freedom, of course, of your body. And the major limiting factor in a lot of this is the economy and money and where we get our money from. But all of this is changing and shifting, and part of it's because of lots of people that are here on the planet who do not want to have this experience anymore. And also a lot of beings external to the planet who see what's going on and don't want to allow these unfair things to be going on. Just how I care about kids that are in school and I don't want them to have a bad experience. That's how a lot of these extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional beings feel about us. They feel something? It's not cool for humans to have to work at a job that they don't want just to earn money. That's like saying you are a horse and you have to carry someone around on a saddle, whether you want to or not, and it's against free will, and that is literally against the gravitational forces of the universe. The universe wants freedom. The universe wants free will because that is the way that DNA becomes aware of itself on its journey and becomes more beautiful and more complex. Without awareness, the DNA does not develop. That is what the extraterrestrial negative thought vibration overlords would like to continue. They would like to continue to have a bunch of asleep victims, a bunch of zombies who walk through life not in control of their reproduction, not in control of what they're eating, not in control of what they're sending off in terms of their mental vibrations. Because the quality of the food that you eat is intimately tied to the quality of the vibrations that you send off. It's not a coincidence that low vibration places like prisons and the military tend to feed their population low vibration food. And, feeding people lower vibration food is a way of diminishing their consciousness. So right now in this time and place, like, I don't eat sugar. If you don't eat certain things, you're not going to shop at certain stores because that's what they've got. Like, I know there are most convenience stores are not going to have the food for me. It's like those are lower vibrational places. Or certain aisles in the grocery store, like I don't go down the candy aisle. I know that's not food for me. And mostly that food to me now seems like an abstraction. It seems like an object, like, oh, how curious, like this object, what can be done with this? It doesn't even seem like a nutritive substance to me. So, part of it is I'm a newcomer to this world, but also, I came here early on and I tried a little bit of everything, and some of it, candy corn, that stuff is not food. Candy corn, chocolate is good food, and honey sweetened chocolate is wonderful alive food. Like if you get, like dark chocolate and they have some, well, anyway, I won't get too much into it, but there's a way to do food right that increases our awareness. And I'm getting a little bit of a mental implication that I should talk a little bit about Atlantis. Okay. Here we go. Someone has tuned in. Talk about stress eating, overeating, and the growing obesity epidemic. Excellent question. So obesity and really having extra fat on the body has everything to do with unprocessed emotional experiences. Literally, you have ingested emotional energy in the form of food, and then it has not been processed. Ordinarily, it would be processed by our physical processes, cardiovascular, aerobic, it's burned, or our mental and emotional processes. However, when you eat a lot, when you continue to consume and consume, but not keep up the metabolism of using what you have consumed, you get backlog. And so how I was saying, like, we should be focused on what we're eating. Well, even if you are focused on what you're eating and you're eating too much, it means that those memories and experiences aren't being broadcast in real time. And it's not just a person who is, shaped like this. It's not just a person who looks big or overweight who might have unprocessed emotions in their body. Unprocessed emotions are stored in subcutaneous fat, in intramuscular fat, and in the tendons and the fasciae, the membranes that hold our organs together. So really what I'm talking about is the way to become a more conscious person and to become free of the negative experiences of the past has everything to do with eating mindfully in the present and then using cardiovascular exercise to go into the backlog of the past. So pilgrimage, this is what pilgrimage is all about. The concept of going on a very long walk or a very long hike or running a long marathon, or the cardiovascular turning over of your fat reserves. And it's not just your fat reserves, it's also the glucose in your liver. So food is energy and food is emotional experience. And when people eat it, if it's not processed, it gets stored up. And then guess what? In order to be free, you're going to have to process that at some point. So when people are overwhelmed, or if they have feelings that they don't want to feel, they often eat too much, because it's like saying like, oh, like we're going to process that later. Let's just process all of that stuff later. Put it into long-term storage, like hamburger, french fries, put it into long-term storage. I can't deal with that right now. And it might be in long-term storage for many, many years until you are ready to one is ready to unlock the experiences that caused that emotional, not blockage, but let's say solidification. Energy should be flowing. Metabolism should be a flow of energy. That's what the toroidal energy field is all about. Energy comes in and then energy flows out. And when metabolism is done right, it's equal. An equal amount of calories are consumed and an equal amount of calories are expended, and that person achieves homeostasis. When a person ingests way more calories than they need, it's not in balance. And in order to return to balance, it's necessary at some point to get into those backlogs. And that's a process of recapitulation or soul retrieval. And it usually is done in private, or a person like on their own, literally going back into memories and into personal experiences, and with the breath, breathing them out. So I know or have read books of people who are long distance runners and marathoners, and they talk about the mental house cleaning that happens when you're out there running. It's not just that you're bored. It's not just that you're out there running and, thinking about random things. A lot of times it might bring up old emotional issues, old hurts of the past. And the way to be free is to say, oh, my body is literally burning off those emotional experiences just like I am burning calories. There's nothing inherently wrong with any emotional experience or any calories, but it's a question of keeping the flow. And you don't want it to be that you have such a backlog of both energy and calories that it's difficult to move forward. But for some people, it is that way. For some people, they are holding on to emotional hurts of the past that are causing blockages and preventing them from moving into the future. They're literally impediments, like trying to walk or run with, like something heavy on your backpack, or if your body literally is very heavy, trying to walk or run with a body that's 100 pounds too heavy is very difficult. And there's a lot of people in this time and place who have had a lot of negative emotional experiences that they are not prepared to deal with. It can be physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse. It can be lack of love. Really, when a lot of people, when they overeat, because food is one of our connections to the divine. Food is love. It is about love. I have a cat, and I saw that you had your cat on the screen. It was so cute to see you hugging and kissing. And you know something? I love my cat, and when I feed her, I'm loving her. That's one way that mammals show that we love each other. And you're a mammal. When you feed yourself, you're literally showing yourself that you love yourself. And likewise, if you're not feeding yourself or feeding yourself well, there are issues of self-love and self-acceptance. So let's talk about both things. Being too overweight, being too skinny. We live in a time and place where this is a very sick and troubled culture, and a lot of females are not able to express self-love and self-acceptance to their bodies. And they think that they are only good and acceptable if they look like certain images in the media. This is all programming from the media that's not human controlled. So once again, we're talking about extraterrestrials that are making you feel bad, making you feel inadequate, and when you want to eat food, saying, you're not allowed to eat that because you will have a fat ass, and then you will be unattractive and unworthy and not valuable as a female. And so there's a lot of people where they're doing the opposite. Some people are eating like way too much and they're like having an emotional backlog. Some people are intentionally not eating, and it is a way of saying to themselves, like, I'm not loving myself. I'm not loving myself. I don't accept my body in the size and shape that it is. I am literally not loving myself. And I mean, I'm not saying this about myself. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but we live in a world, this is very out of balance. And really, we need to get everything into balance. So just like it's like not to get too much on one side, not to get too much on the other side, and dependent upon what each person needs as their personal prescription or their personal agenda for happiness. Everybody needs to focus on their food, because that's a sense of, that's when you're focusing on your food, you're getting it inside of you, and needs to eat food of the appropriate amount and appropriate constituent elements, and to be free to exercise, because that's the other thing. When you're exercising cardiovascular, you're literally metabolizing experiences. You're keeping those experiences flowing. So if you are too overweight to exercise, you're not flowing your experiences. And if you never eat, then you can't exercise. Like, if you only consume 100 calories a day, you don't have the energy necessary to go to the gym. And I definitely, because, I learned what it was like to not consume enough physical food. And then I learned what it felt like to consume enough physical food. And I said, oh, my body feels so much better when I eat a hamburger. I now have energy. I now can go and do things. So it's disempowering for people who choose not to eat food. And it's disempowering for people who choose to eat too much food. And so this is all about coming into balance. And when I see someone who's got a lot of extra fat on their body, the way that I interpret it without any judgment is huge emotional backlog. That's the best way to describe it. And you don't fix it by saying to a person, okay, I'm now going to rigidly control the amount of calories that come into you. Like the way they do on these different weight loss shows, like The Biggest Loser, they'll say, strict diet, here's your strict amount of calories, and get on the treadmill and start going. What really causes the transformation on that show is the emotional journey. A lot of people, they're going through these severe exercise programs, and they'll be like crying. And they'll even share things about their past, about family members, about feeling diminished, about why they got to be hundreds of pounds overweight in the first place. That's where the real transformation happens. It happens on an emotional level. And I'll give an anecdotal story. A friend of mine who used to be at least 100 pounds overweight, in response to a terrible sexual attack that had happened to her in her 20s. And she used to wear also really big, heavy, bulky sweatpants and sweatshirts, and totally just to look amorphous. And I would go to the sweat lodge with her in a place where I came from, and over many years. And I watched her body transform. She didn't necessarily change the food that she was eating or change her diet that radically, but she released emotions in the sweat lodge. She was able to talk about her experiences, her traumatic experiences. She was able to see how they connected to her present relationship. And she went through a divorce. She ended a relationship that she felt was unhealthy. And all of that caused major changes and shifts in her body, and now she's quite slender and quite fit and doing really great. And anyway, so this is all about real body transformation happens on an emotional level. And when we hear about people like, in the 1980s, Oprah went on a crash diet. She drank nothing but special weight loss smoothies, and then she was very slender, but only for a short amount of time, because she admitted that she wasn't really taking care of the emotions inside. She was just following a very strict diet and exercise plan. And at a certain point, as soon as you relax the willpower and control, then you go back to the old patterns. And that real change comes from changing those emotional patterns, healing the emotional or sexual abuse that happened in the past. And something, my cat is very overweight. Mike knows this. Mike knows my cat, and she begs food a lot. And she's very loving, but she used to be even more big than she is now. And she came from a background where she had a lot of anxiety and a sense of not being safe and not knowing if there was going to be food or if the other cats would eat all the food or what was going to happen. And I've had her for like 8 years. And over those 8 years, she's learned there's always food in the food dish. You don't have to have food anxiety. If anyone has ever gone through a time in their life when they either, were really poor or didn't have enough food for whatever reason, it causes programming that's very deep. People have found this, like if you had starvation in childhood, like in World War II, or some people that were in refugee camps in various different times, it causes a huge psychological impact. Or people who grew up during the Great Depression. I had aged elderly relatives who still shared a tea bag with each other, because even though the Great Depression was, 80 years ago, 60 years ago, but they were still living with that mentality of there's not going to be enough food. And so people who are programmed for that mentality of there's not enough, Your body will hold on to calories. You'll eat a lot, like not leave leftovers, not leave anything on the plate, eat a lot, and your body will hold on to that stuff because it's saying, what if there's not enough? I better hold stuff on.